we're going to actually be talking about the show.
Darth Plagueis was so powerful and wise. And
is that's actually, they're talking about a specific individual that Mon Mothma was talking about, which is Manny Bothans died.
Oh, shut
dude,
up.
Yes.
The power of Manyyyyyy.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
Welcome back to the Geeky Stoics Podcast. I'm Riley. He's Stephen. What's going on, man?
Hey.
You know, there's only one thing to talk about.
What is that? Is it a new Star Wars show?
There's a new Star Wars.
Breaking brains on the internet?
The Acolyte. You hear about this? You hear about this, Stephen? It's this new show. But,
well,
it's
Star Wars is dead. How can there be a new show?
I know, right? No, my soul might be dead from the dialogue around this show, but no, we are talking about The Acolyte. We are actually already at the halfway point of the season as we're recording this. Episode 4 just aired last night, and we're gonna do this weird thing. So I'm gonna say this right at the top of the show. Hang on, I should go to single shot. Here we go. Right here at the beginning of the show. This is a crazy thing we're gonna do. Yes, we're going to touch on some of the fandom conversations surrounding the show because you kind of have to, but we're going to be doing it from a more constructive and philosophical angle. And here's the other thing. We're going to actually be talking about the show. Like the actual plot points, story, characters, and because it's Geeky Stoics, the philosophical underpinnings. The interesting thing, Stephen, I think there's no way to get around that means this still is a real world conversation. We can't really have these conversations without tying in the real world political and social discourse. But I don't think that's a bad thing. But that shouldn't be our primary. Here's what we're not doing. We're not hitching a ride to Team Red or Team Blue on the culture war front. So I just wanted to say that at the top of the show, in case that's what you're expecting. But yeah, Stephen, I'm actually really excited to catch up because we've had a lot of Star Wars content on the show that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to discuss. Again, The Acolyte is new ground in a lot of ways for Star Wars. We've never gone back to a time before the George Lucas Star Wars timeline. We've never been here before. This is, not quite people's wish list item of the Old Republic, but the High Republic era where the Jedi were kind of the cops of the Republic, policing hyperspace trade routes and all that kind of stuff. It's a very different era. I don't know. And the conversation about this show has, I think, been around, so whether or not it breaks canon. So one, the Kiadi Mundi line, the Sith haven't been seen for a millennium, 100 years. Is the Acolyte that Sith, the one who was seen 100 years ago? Or no, wait, no, 100. He says a millennium. That's 1,000. Yeah, that's 1,000 years ago. Yeah,
or maybe he means 900 years because because of this dude.
Yeah, exactly. So millennium's 1,000 years. So does it break canon? And then also, we now have Osha and May, these two girls of this witch tribe who are conceived by the Force, and we've seen that before. That's the virgin birth of Anakin Skywalker, virgin birth in the sense that it was conceived without a father by Shmi Skywalker, and that sort of they've made Anakin unspecial now. I'm kind of open to feedback on that and criticism on that. I don't really know what to make of it. Besides, the world doesn't revolve around Anakin Skywalker, and Anakin Skywalker is also the chosen one in Jedi lore, mythology, and in their prophecies, which, by the way, are controversial. The Jedi don't believe in prophecies. Qui-Gon Jinn did. Mace Windu entertained it, but he thought it to be misguiding. Count Dooku was big on prophecies, but the Jedi Order, by and large, doesn't even believe in prophecies. So when they are kind of going he could be the chosen one, they're mostly just paranoid at this point. They're could we be wrong that prophecies are actually true? So I don't know. I don't really take so much offense at this stuff, that the Force might have also been used to conceive other children. Because there's like a little bit of pearl clutching going on around Darth Plagueis, and that Darth Plagueis was so powerful and wise, and it took him all this time to use the midichlorians to create life.
Yeah.
But
Well,
we
and
also,
Stephen, it's ironic because he could save others from death, but not himself. Anytime you set me up
Tragic.
where I can do a Palpatine impression, I will. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I mean, we don't have, unfortunately, if we had time to do a 2-hour podcast today, we probably could and would. But I do think that these are some of the big rocks that I wanted to discuss with you from the show. Is the conversation around whether or not May and Osha's existence and conception is lore breaking, whether the interpretation of the Force as communicated by in episode 3 by the tribe of witches, the thread, is that lore breaking. And then I think we can also get into this most recent episode, which I think is probably the most interesting, which is some of the character decisions and intrigue that's trying to build around who this mysterious Star Wars Sith-looking dude or dudette is. I don't know. It'll be interesting to. I'm most interested, I think, in what I think the attempt here, which I think is a really interesting premise, which has often been the curse with a lot of those storytelling in the Disney Star Wars era that's fallen short, is where it's a really interesting premise or idea executed poorly. And I think that's the example here with a lot of the way that the
can we talk about the thread,
witch
though?
tribe?
Do you
whole thread
like
thing.
Yeah, do you like the thread? Because my instant reaction to that was, just multicultural anthropology, where you've got the Force, like we call it the Force, thanks to Star Wars, George Lucas, and the story of Luke Skywalker, which is based in the cultural practices of the Jedi and the Sith, who used to be one. They schismed, and they both still worship and practice and follow this thing called the Force. But in other cultures and weird little witch tribes and all this stuff, like we already knew about the Night Sisters who manipulate the Force in this thing called magic with a K. But this tribe calls it the thread. And I just immediately think about all the different words that people use for like God. There's all these different cultures in our own world where people refer to the idea of a God as the timeless being, the creator, the formless one. Whether you're in Africa or India or Pakistan and you're calling God Allah or Yahweh or, the Father, like all of this stuff. We around the world, we have different words to describe the same thing, which is a higher power of some kind. I just don't take any offense that this witch tribe don't call it the Force; they call it the thread, and it's the same thing.
No, it's an example where I think the real world culture war elements are grasping at plot elements that fit a narrative. And that's, I think, an example of like, well, they're trying to change the Force, which I think objectively is not what the story is doing. Now, I don't think the execution's very effective because I think the way it comes across stylistically is inconsistent with what we're familiar with in Star Wars. And I don't mean inconsistent with the Jedi, but just like the whole presentation. And you kind of are setting yourself up for mockery when you do a nearly holiday special level musical number that's associated
that
with
was bad.
Perspective.
That song, the power of money, the power
well, in fact, I actually don't
so
think,
bad.
I think what people really don't realize is that that's actually they're talking about a specific individual that Mon Mothma was talking about, which is Manny Bothans died.
Oh,
his
shut
dude.
up.
Yes.
I thought it was really silly. Like, it just sort of sounded to me like, this weird, it was too real, like too real world. And it didn't feel like Star Wars. And there was this interview or video that was put out by the composer who put together that song. And he basically was talking about how he had all the different witches from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds in the real world saying the chant in their own languages with their own mannerisms and words. So it was like this very sort of mixed stew of a witch, you
Mhm.
know, seance,
Yeah.
and that kind of gave it the vibe. But all I remember is that cheesy song, which just sounded to me like, again, something out of
Yeah.
the TV specials for Star Wars.
It it
It was a
it
little
really
goofy.
if you've never seen Carrie Fisher belt out the Life Day song, you're missing out. And I would put it in some of that same category. It's
What do you sort of make though about I guess the reverence for the Jedi in this show? Because you know there's a layer of the Acolyte and Leslie Headland, and well, we promised we weren't going to talk about the people making the show and just about the content, but you know
I
there's a
made no such
layer.
promise. I alluded to.
Yeah, I mean there's a layer here of real world cultural criticism about colonialism
Mm,
and you know the idea of the Jedi and the Republic, you know, as world police
yep.
and you know stealing away children. You know, there's immediately sort of, for anyone who's you know grown up in the West, like a connotation there of the slave trade, even though you know the Jedi are obviously not equivalent. But there's that idea they're coming to take the children
Yep.
against the
It's
family's
about
will.
power and who's
Yeah.
allowed to use it. That line
Do,
especially.
do you think that that's important to talk about or think about, or that it just still fits into the context of Star Wars? Because we knew that Jedi took children,
Yeah.
and it probably wasn't always great.
Yeah, no. It was confusing. Again, an execution thing. The part that confused me was that Jedi have jurisdiction within the Republic, and we know that. And they specifically say we are not part of the Republic, so you don't have jurisdiction. But they're like, but we need to do this blood test anyway, and you don't have a choice. Or actually, no, I should be specific because that's the other thing. I think people are saying, hey, they're kind of ragging on the Jedi, which I think it's more nuanced than that, because we even see Soul offers if she wants to be tested, and even Trinity, I forget her name. Even Trinity is like, with
Yeah.
your permission. She does ask with an element of strongly suggest.
Trinity strikes me as a radical. I'm just going to call her Trinity as well, because you know, in the beginning of the show when she gets assassinated, she seems like kind of a dick. She doesn't like seem like a nice
Little
person.
bit. Yeah.
And she also seems like a bit of a dick when they go to the witches and they want to take the
Yeah.
kids. She strikes me as possibly a radical, whereas Soul is not, and he's much more consent driven when it comes to getting the children
Mhm.
to join
Yep.
the Jedi. And so
Yeah.
I did not take her at her word when she was like, yeah, with your permission, you know,
Yeah.
wink, wink, we are taking you.
With
I didn't really buy that at all.
Yeah.
But
But at the
we always used to talk about how the Jedi were flawed, you know,
Yeah.
prequel fans and
Oh,
conservatives,
100%.
liberal, whatever. We always talked about the Jedi were flawed. And so now we're just seeing it with our own eyes. And I think people just don't like what they see.
Well, and here's
Big
the
deal.
problem: is there's this false equivalency where is with the High Republic era in general, but I especially with the show, which is bumped up right within that time frame of the Phantom Menace. Like we just saw freaking Kiadi Mundi in the Kiadi. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium. Mundi, that's him. But what we're seeing is his. I mean, this era being only 100 years separated, this is not the height of the Jedi. This is the beginning of the fall. This is where the cracks are showing. This is not the Guardians of Peace and Justice that, you know, for over 1,000 generations, the Guardians of Peace and Justice in the Old Republic. This is not that time frame. And I think people kind of expected to see that a little bit, so that when they see the flawed Jedi and when they see some of the arrogance and when they see some of the secrecy, the middle management council, if you will, hiding things from the high council, which I thought was hilarious. Like, we can't, because I've seen, listen, as a guy who works in a highly structured organization, aka the military, I've seen that all the time. Let's solve this at the lowest level. That's usually what they say. We'll just solve this at the lowest level, keep things secret. This whole Acolyte Jedi masters are being slaughtered. Let's not bring that up. Let's not put that on the agenda for the High Council.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is such a thing as middle management. You know,
Evidently.
yeah. I mean, it's always there.
Well, let me ask you this then. As we look at the premise of the Acolyte itself, episode 4 kind of changes a lot right in the middle, where suddenly, and I'll say all of a sudden, May switches teams essentially. Like she decides that this whole she doesn't want to be the errand boy for this Sith Lord or this master. She's sick of it, and so she's leaving her, hanging her buddy out to dry, quite literally, and going to go surrender to the Jedi that she was about to murder. And of course, discovers Kelnaka. It does not benefit from the lightsaber ineffectiveness that we've seen in so many other Disney Plus series. He's probably like, "Come on, guys! It's just a little slash. Yep. I should be able to survive."
Devastating.
He did. I love that this kind of puts the whole premise on its head, because now we shift all the momentum and weight into the horror, into the secrecy, into the darkness rising, and how are the Jedi going to deal with it? I'm actually much more excited about what that story is than I was the May versus Osha sister conflict. And it suddenly turns May from this like fallen acolyte, pun intended, into now more of a rogue. She's suddenly, like, in an instant, in one scene in this most recent episode, she's now the rogue character, which I think is a much more interesting character. The unfortunate thing is that in classic recent Star Wars fashion, there's no setup, there's no conversations between her and May, there's no resolution that changes the weight of why she's going so hard to murder all these Jedi to please this master, and then suddenly there's no background to it. Even though I like the new direction, I definitely think that work needed to be done to make this, I guess, more make sense, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm on board with you. I don't trust May's kind of change of alignment here. I mean, she was psychopathic as a child. Those flashback scenes of them growing up with the witches and the way that girl behaved, she has dead eyes. To be clear. Osha is sweet and kind, and she vibes sensitive, and May is dead inside.
Kill the butterfly. That's May.
At least as a child. So I don't trust anything that this person does. And if she's having some sort of change of heart, or she doesn't want to be an errand boy for the Sith Acolyte, then I think she's probably just going to go crawling back and be like, okay, sorry, I am with you. We'll see what happens. That's why this is a series, and I don't understand, any apprehensions about cliffhangers or unresolved arcs. We won't know how this story goes until it's over. But I definitely don't trust May at all. I think she's a bad person, and I'm anti-May.
Yeah, I'm not exactly the biggest fan. But it kind of brings, there's a whole dynamic there that we haven't talked about, which is probably the last thing we should definitely touch on. And I'm going to throw this up on the screen so that we can of course, Entertainment Weekly was ready to go because that's what the mainstream outlets do, is they have the access to actually interview. It's so interesting to see like fan media or like politicized partisan media's coverage versus, like, again, if you go to the trades, it's still all the standard kind of coverage as if nothing is wrong and nothing is different at all. But they do have, of course, a quick interview with the Acolyte creator there, where they get a reaction to this big cliffhanger, and that is Quamir. I think there's definitely something that links him more directly. I do not think he is either an errand boy either. I think he either is this armored Sith Lord, or he is certainly a Force-sensitive apprentice. A Sith Lord?
I think so. It's possible that this is a big red herring, of course, because it's so obvious, that it would be. He's creepy. He's weird. He has very strong opinions about the Jedi.
Yeah.
When he got up in Osha's face and was like, "You look just like her." He had evil eyes again. But that doesn't mean that he's necessarily, a Sith acolyte. It could just again mean that he's in the web in some way. So we'll see what happens. But I would say it's definitely too obvious that he would be the Acolyte. But also, I didn't know that we were really trying to find a suspect. I've never been operating under the assumption that there is the masked Sith, and then there is, the Clark Kent version of it wandering around where you can see him.
Yeah, that's true.
I wasn't operating under that assumption. That was Palpatine's thing, though. Palpatine was that person.
I've unfortunately, I think, fallen prey to that category because my theory mind, like who's raised parents part of my brain is gone to like, or is it like one of the witches, one of the mothers survived? I think that would be one of the more interesting things, is if instead of them alluding to and presenting the witches as sympathetic with their alternative view of the Force, she does say, like the witch in the Ascension ceremony, that some call their powers unnatural, which is a language that the Sith use, and I think that would be an interesting twist if there's a shift that shows, hey, maybe they're not the altruistic girl band that we thought they were. That would be an interesting twist as well.
And that kind of goes again to like the politics here. And I don't like using this expression because it's loaded but in movies and storytelling, there's the storytelling trope of the noble savage. This is what Avatar, James Cameron Avatars is based off of, where you basically have sort of like a Western stand-in colonizing or invading a indigenous people's land, and they are spiritual, noble, in touch with the earth, and the Western invaders are destroyers of life and beauty itself. It's basically just European settlers destroying sort of a mythic and idealized Native American culture, where you ignore everything barbaric and horrible about it, and just focus on the fact that they were in touch with the land that they managed. And so there's that going on here as well, that the witches are some kind of minority group, some kind of oppressed class, some sort of indigenous culture that the Jedi threaten with their sort of, better than thou approach to governing the galaxy through the Republic. And I honestly, like, if that was their intention to make me feel that way about them, they kind of failed, because I didn't like any of them. I thought they were creepy. I thought that their seance was dark and grim, and I don't like the way that they acted. The mother, was kind to Osha, her daughter, and I appreciated that. But this wasn't like a culture that I was like, "Rah, go you, girl power." Maybe this should be wiped from the galaxy.
all right. Well, slow down. I think no, I see I think the most refreshing take would be if there was nuance, if there was an element of both, if they were sympathetic because they were more or less leaving the rest of the galaxy alone, but maybe they weren't the best, and maybe they were controlling, and maybe they did have darker plans. Maybe they were collaborating with certain other dark powers that be the unnatural powers. That to me would be an interesting story, because that's really what the Acolyte, I think, is attempting, which is nuance, which is something that is not as black and white as other Star Wars. And I think there's room for that in Star Wars storytelling. I've just been a little disappointed with the execution, but I will say I loved the cliffhanger right here. I'm ready. Like when all the lightsabers ignite and the creepy dude floats down into the shot behind Osha. I was like, let's go.
I know we're
ready for
at a time cutoff. You want to know my big?
Let's do it. Yeah, hit me, man.
My big reveal.
Yeah,
I haven't watched the new episode yet.
Oh, you jerk. Last time in the background is I was like, Steven, we can't record until we've got to watch the episode and then record.
It's totally fine. I was just gonna let you go and tell me everything. I'm not very sensitive about spoilers. I just kind of absorb it all.
Good Lord.
I'm
All
not-
right,
I'm not-
man.
not
Hey,
precious
here's
about
what you want to do. Geekystoics.com. Geekystoics.com. That's the newsletter. Sign up for our Substack. We got some awesome pieces coming up. And of course, if you enjoy this video podcast, leave a like, thumbs up, comment, share. I'd be really interested to see where you guys are on the Acolyte so far. Halfway through, I think some good potential, some poor execution. Again, I promised at the beginning of this episode, we're going to discuss this in a constructive, like we're going to try to have at least a little bit of original thought in our approach to these reviews. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, may the force be with you.
Always.